Hold her down tighter. She needs to learn respect. The icy water crashed against Samantha Rivers' naked body as 3 guards pinned her to the concrete floor of cell block D. Her screams echoed through the underground detention facility at Thornfield Correctional, but no one was coming to help. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong," she gasped through chattering teeth as another bucket of freezing water drenched her trembling form. Warden Patricia Voss stood over her, arms crossed, watching with cold satisfaction. "Didn't do anything. You assaulted Officer Bradley. You disrupted the entire mess hall. Prisoners like you need to understand their place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The other inmates pressed against their cell bars, some jeering, others watching in horrified silence. Samantha Rivers had been at Thornfield for 8 months, and most saw her as just another violent criminal who finally got what was coming to her. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that the shivering, broken woman on that freezing floor was Lieutenant Commander Samantha Rivers, the Navy SEAL who single-handedly evacuated 847 civilians from Kabul during the Taliban's final assault. The woman they were torturing had once held off an entire insurgent platoon for 6 hours while wounded, ensuring that 3 school buses full of children could escape to safety. But that revelation was still hours away, and right now all anyone saw was inmate 477, a supposed cop killer who'd been nothing but trouble since her arrival. Let me tell you how we got here, and how a moment of recognition would change everything forever. Samantha Rivers was 29 years old when she entered Thornfield Correctional Facility, quiet, reserved, with the kind of stillness that made other inmates uncomfortable. She had short auburn hair, green eyes that seemed to see everything, and a way of moving that was too controlled, too precise for someone who'd supposedly lived on the streets. The official story was simple. Former police officer gone bad, killed her partner in a drug deal gone wrong, sentenced to 15 years, case closed. The media had painted her as a corrupt cop who'd betrayed everything the badge stood for. From day one, the other inmates sensed something different about her. She wasn't like the usual arrivals who came in, either terrified or trying to prove how tough they were. Samantha was something else entirely. Calm, alert, and completely unreadable. "Fresh meat's weird," muttered Diane Crawford, a lifer who ran the kitchen crew. "Keeps to herself, doesn't talk about her case. But watch how she moves. That ain't no street cop." The guards were suspicious too. Officer Bradley, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for breaking difficult prisoners, had made Samantha his personal project. From the moment she walked through the gates, "I've seen hundreds of ex-cops come through here," he told Warden Voss during their weekly briefing. "Corrupt or not, they all have the same swagger, the same attitude. This one's different. She moves like, I don't know, military maybe." Warden Voss had dismissed his concerns. "Her file says Police Academy, 2 years on the force before she went dirty. Stop looking for mysteries where there aren't any, Bradley. Just keep her in line." But Officer Bradley wasn't wrong. There were signs everywhere if you knew what to look for. The way Samantha automatically scanned every room she entered, noting exits and potential threats. How she could sit perfectly still for hours, but be on her feet and ready for action in under 2 seconds. The way she ate efficiently, never letting her guard down, always aware of her surroundings. Dr. Rachel Morgan, the prison psychologist, noticed it during their mandatory intake session. "You have exceptional situational awareness, Samantha. Have you had military training?" "No, ma'am, just learned to watch my back on the streets." But Dr. Morgan had worked with veterans before. She recognized the signs of someone who'd been in combat, the hypervigilance, the way Samantha's eyes tracked movement. the controlled breathing techniques she used to stay calm. This wasn't street survival instincts. This was something much more sophisticated. The other inmates tried to place her in the prison hierarchy. She wasn't a leader like Big Ruth Thompson, who controlled the drug trade. She wasn't muscle like the Torres sisters, who handled enforcement for various prison gangs. She wasn't even obviously vulnerable like some of the first-time offenders. Samantha was something they'd never encountered, completely self-contained, needing nothing from anyone but also not threatening their operations. She was a ghost, moving through their world, but not really part of it. "She's hiding something," insisted Maya Patel, who'd been watching Samantha for months. Nobody's that calm about being locked up, especially not an ex-cop. They usually crack within the first month when they realize how much everyone hates them. For 8 months, Samantha kept her head down, did her assigned work in the laundry facility, and avoided trouble. She never talked about her case, never complained about the conditions, never got into fights with other inmates. But she also never showed fear, never backed down when challenged, and never let anyone see her truly vulnerable. The guards began to resent her composure. Officer Bradley especially seemed determined to crack what he called her act. "She thinks she's better than everyone else," he complained to his colleagues, "looking down on us like she's some kind of princess. I'm going to teach her what happens to cops in here." The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in the mess hall. Samantha was eating breakfast alone, as usual, when Trina Walsh, a violent offender with nothing to lose, decided to make a statement by dumping her tray on Samantha's head. The room went silent, waiting to see how the mysterious ex-cop would react. Samantha slowly wiped food from her face, looked up at Trina, and said quietly, "That wasn't necessary." Trina laughed and shoved Samantha's shoulder. "What you gonna do about it, cop? Cry to the guards?" That's when something flickered in Samantha's eyes. Just for a second, but enough for those watching closely to notice. It wasn't anger or fear. It was the look of someone calculating threat levels and response options at lightning speed. Trina raised her hand to shove Samantha again. This time Samantha moved. The takedown was so fast, so precise, that most people missed exactly what happened. One moment Trina was standing over Samantha menacingly. The next moment she was face down on the floor with her arm twisted behind her back at an angle that suggested Samantha could break it without much effort. "Let me up! Let me up!" Trina screamed. Samantha released her immediately and stepped back, hands raised. "I was defending myself." Officer Bradley came running, and when he saw Trina on the ground holding her shoulder, his face lit up with opportunity. "Assault on another inmate," he announced loudly. "Looks like our quiet little cop just showed her true colors." The other officers surrounded Samantha, but she didn't resist as they cuffed her. She knew what came next in places like this. She'd been in enough of them overseas to understand the game. But what she couldn't have predicted was how far Warden Voss would take her lesson. And now, 12 hours later, she lay on the freezing concrete of solitary confinement, naked and shivering as ice water ran down the drain around her. "One more time," Warden Voss said, nodding to the guards with the buckets. "Maybe this will teach you that nobody's special at Thornfield." The water hit her again, and Samantha closed her eyes, trying to go somewhere else in her mind. Somewhere warm, somewhere she wasn't inmate 4477, but Lieutenant Commander Rivers, leading her team through the mountains outside Kabul. She had no idea that in just a few hours, a single whispered recognition would change everything forever. The guards at Thornfield Correctional had their own version of Samantha Rivers, and it wasn't flattering. "She's a dirty cop who thinks she's hot shit," Officer Bradley announced during the morning briefing, 3 days after the ice water incident. "Killed her own partner for drug money, then acts like she's above the rest of us." The other guards nodded in agreement. They'd all read her file. Officer Samantha Rivers, Metro City Police Department, 2 years of service before she allegedly shot Detective Frank Morrison during a botched cocaine deal. The story was all over the local news when it happened. Corrupt cop betrays partner, steals evidence money, ruins the reputation of an entire precinct. Classic case, muttered Officer Janet Hayes, a 20-year veteran who'd seen it all. Young cop gets greedy, thinks the rules don't apply to her. Now she's paying the price and doesn't like it. To them, Samantha was just another fallen officer who couldn't handle the reality of prison life. Her quiet demeanor wasn't strength, it was arrogance. Her calm composure wasn't discipline, it was delusion. She walks around here like she's better than everyone, complained Officer Rodriguez. Never talks to the other inmates, never participates in group activities, thinks she's too good to mix with the regular criminals. Dr. Morgan had tried to include Samantha in group therapy sessions for former law enforcement officers. 3 other ex-cops were doing time at Thornfield, and they'd formed a tight support group to help each other survive. But Samantha never participated. I don't need therapy, she'd told Dr. Morgan politely but firmly. I'm fine handling this on my own. The other ex-cops took this as confirmation of what they'd suspected. Samantha Rivers thought she was special. She won't even talk to us, said former Detective Linda Shaw, serving 8 years for evidence tampering. We tried to bring her into the group, warn her about the dangers, but she acts like we're beneath her. Typical dirty cop mentality, added ex-Sergeant Mike Foster. Probably thinks we're small time compared to whatever big score she was chasing. The regular inmates had their own theories about the mysterious woman in cell 247. She's definitely hiding something, Maya Patel whispered to her cellmate during evening count. No cop stays that calm in here unless they've done way worse than what they're locked up for. Big Ruth Thompson, who controlled most of the contraband flow through the prison, had attempted to recruit Samantha for her operation. Ex-cops often made good soldiers because they understood how the system worked and could spot potential problems before they developed. But Samantha had declined without explanation. Not interested, she'd said simply when Ruth approached her in the yard. Not interested in protection, in making some money, in having friends who will watch your back? Not interested, Samantha repeated, then walked away. Ruth was insulted. In her 15 years at Thornfield, nobody had dismissed her that casually. She thinks she's untouchable, Ruth told her lieutenants later. Probably has connections on the outside. Maybe her cop friends are protecting her somehow. The theory gained traction throughout the prison. Samantha Rivers was either completely naive about prison life or she had powerful people protecting her. Either way, she was asking for trouble. Even the guards who didn't actively dislike her found her frustrating. I've tried to give her advice, said Officer Martinez, one of the more compassionate guards. Told her to keep her head down, make some allies, find a group to protect her. But she just nods politely and ignores everything I say. She's going to get herself killed, predicted Officer Hayes. And when it happens, she'll have nobody to blame but herself. The kitchen staff found her odd, too. Samantha worked the early shift in the laundry facility, but during mealtime she moved through the lines with an efficiency that seemed almost military-like. She never asked for extra portions, never complained about the food quality, never engaged in the usual banter with the serving staff. She eats like she's in a hurry to get somewhere, observed Diane Crawford. But where's she going? Back to her cell to stare at the walls. The most damaging interpretation came from Warden Voss herself, who saw Samantha's quiet competence as arrogance that needed to be broken. She thinks prison is temporary for her, Voss explained to the administrative staff. Probably believes her police connections will get her sentence reduced or overturned. She needs to understand that this is her reality now. Voss had made it her personal mission to humble what she saw as Samantha's superior attitude. "Every week she's here acting like she's above the system," Voss continued. "No commissary purchases, no phone calls, no visitors. She's waiting for someone to rescue her instead of accepting her situation." The warden's interpretation filtered down through the entire staff. Samantha Rivers wasn't adapting to prison life. She was rejecting it, believing herself too good for the consequences of her actions. "She killed a good cop," Officer Bradley reminded anyone who would listen. "Detective Morrison had a wife and kids, and this woman shot him in cold blood for money. Now she acts like she's the victim." The narrative became entrenched. Samantha Rivers was a corrupt police officer whose greed had led her to murder. Now, faced with the reality of her crimes, she was retreating into delusions of superiority rather than accepting responsibility. Her work supervisor in the laundry facility, Mrs. Patterson, found her confusing and slightly unsettling. "She does excellent work," Patterson admitted to the staff psychologist. "Never late, never complains, follows all procedures perfectly, but she doesn't talk to anyone. The other workers try to include her in conversations, but she just nods and keeps working." "Maybe she's planning something," suggested one of the senior guards. "Quiet ones are often the most dangerous." The prison newsletter even ran a subtle warning about inmates who fail to integrate into the community, using language that everyone understood, referred to Samantha without naming her directly. "Some individuals believe they can serve their time in isolation," the article read. "This antisocial behavior often masks deeper problems and can lead to dangerous situations for everyone." The message was clear. Samantha Rivers was a problem waiting to explode. 3 months into her sentence, the consensus was universal. She was an arrogant ex-cop who thought the rules didn't apply to her, who believed she was better than her fellow inmates, and who was headed for a harsh reality check. "She'll break eventually," predicted Dr. Morgan during a staff meeting. "They always do. The question is whether she'll hurt someone else when it happens." Even the inmates who didn't actively dislike her saw her as foolishly naive. "Prison ain't about staying clean and keeping your head down," Trina Walsh had warned her early on. "You gotta choose a side, make connections, show people you belong somewhere, otherwise you're just meat waiting to be carved up." But Samantha had listened politely and continued on her solitary path. To everyone at Thornfield Correctional, Samantha Rivers was exactly what her file said she was, a fallen police officer whose corruption had caught up with her, now refusing to face the reality of her situation. They saw her silence as arrogance, her composure as delusion, her independence as dangerous antisocial behavior. What they couldn't see was the truth that would soon emerge from the shadows of a classified military operation thousands of miles away. But that revelation was still days away. For now, Samantha Rivers remained exactly what everyone believed her to be, inmate 4477, serving 15 years for murder, too proud to accept her place in the prison hierarchy. And that false perception was about to make her situation much, much worse. The first person to notice something didn't add up about Samantha Rivers was Tommy Vasquez, a former Army Ranger serving time for armed robbery. He'd been watching her for weeks, and something about her movement patterns triggered his military instincts. "She clears corners," he whispered to his cellmate one evening after lights out. "Every doorway, every intersection in the halls. She positions herself so she can see the whole room when she eats. That's not cop training. That's combat deployment behavior." Tommy had done 3 tours in Afghanistan before his PTSD, and addiction landed him at Thornfield. He recognized the signs because he displayed many of them himself. But Samantha's were more refined, more deeply ingrained. "Watch her tomorrow during yard time," he told Jackson Miller, another vet who was serving time for assault. She'll find the spot with the best sight lines and position herself where she can move quickly in any direction. Bet you anything. Jackson was skeptical until he observed for himself. Sure enough, Samantha always chose the same area near the northeast corner of the recreation yard, a position that offered clear views of all entrances and multiple escape routes. That's professional-level tactical awareness, Jackson admitted. Question is, where did a Metro City cop learn to think like special operations? The subtle signs multiplied for those who knew what to look for. During the mandatory fire drill the previous month, while other inmates had milled around confused and annoyed, Samantha had immediately assessed the situation, identified the safest exit route, and positioned herself to help others if necessary. She counted heads, observed Maria Santos, a former EMT serving time for prescription fraud. While everyone else was complaining about standing in the cold, she was making sure everyone made it out of the building. That's crisis management training. Dr. Morgan began paying closer attention during their weekly sessions. Samantha's responses to standard psychological assessments didn't match her supposed background. Tell me about your police training, Dr. Morgan had asked during one session. Basic academy curriculum, nothing special. Did you ever receive additional tactical training? SWAT courses, maybe. A pause. Some advanced courses. Which ones specifically? Another pause, longer this time. I'd prefer not to discuss the details. Dr. Morgan made a note. Police officers, even corrupt ones, typically loved talking about their training and achievements. Samantha's reluctance suggested either trauma associated with her training or something she needed to hide. The prison librarian, Mrs. Helen Foster, noticed Samantha's reading choices were unusual for someone with her supposed background. While other inmates checked out romance novels, true crime books, or legal guides for appeals, Samantha gravitated toward military history, international relations, and language learning materials. She's working through a Pashto language textbook, Mrs. Foster confided to Dr. Morgan. Said she was interested in Middle Eastern culture, but who studies Afghan languages for fun in prison? More concerning was what happened during the lockdown incident 2 months earlier. A fight between rival gangs had triggered a facility-wide emergency, and all inmates were ordered to their cells immediately. Officer Rodriguez had been rushing down D Block when he slipped and fell hard, striking his head on the concrete floor. He was unconscious and bleeding while chaos erupted around him. Most inmates had either ignored the situation or actively celebrated seeing a guard hurt. But Samantha had immediately dropped to her knees beside Rodriguez, checking his pulse and airway. Head trauma, possible concussion, she'd called out to the other guards rushing to respond. He needs immediate medical attention, but don't move him until you've stabilized his neck. Her assessment had been exactly right, and the prison medical staff later credited her quick thinking with preventing potentially serious complications. Where did you learn emergency medical procedures? Officer Martinez had asked her afterward. Basic first aid training from the police academy. But Officer Martinez had attended the same regional police academy. Their first aid training covered CPR and basic wound care, not trauma assessment and spinal injury protocols. The incident with Trina Walsh in the mess hall had revealed even more concerning details to those paying attention. Tommy Vasquez had been sitting 3 tables away and saw exactly what happened. That wasn't a lucky move, he explained to Jackson later. She identified the threat, assessed the attack angle, and neutralized it with minimal force in under 2 seconds. That's close quarters combat training at a very high level. Jackson had seen the aftermath. The way she controlled Trina's arm, that was a textbook joint manipulation technique. Special forces learn that stuff, not street cops. Even the kitchen staff had begun noticing odd details, about Samantha's behavior. She could estimate portion sizes with mathematical precision, never wasted food, and ate with the efficient speed of someone accustomed to uncertain meal schedules. She finishes everything on her tray in exactly 6 minutes. Diane Crawford had timed her. Every single meal. That's not normal eating, that's trained behavior. Physical evidence was accumulating too. The prison nurse Janet Kim had examined Samantha during intake and noted several unusual scars. Entry and exit wounds on her left shoulder, she'd documented. Surgical repair indicates high-quality medical care, probably military or specialized civilian facility. Also noted rope burn scarring on both wrists and what appears to be shrapnel scarring along her left ribs. When asked about the scars during medical intake, Samantha had been vague. Accident when I was younger. What kind of accident? Car crash. But Nurse Kim had treated car accident victims for 20 years. Samantha's scars didn't match that explanation. The most telling incident occurred during a surprise contraband search when drug-sniffing dogs were brought into the facility. All inmates were required to stand at attention while their cells were searched. One of the German shepherds, named Rex, had approached Samantha and immediately sat at attention, tail wagging. His handler, Officer Brooks, was confused. Rex only reacts that way to law enforcement and military personnel he recognizes as friendly, Brooks explained to Warden Voss later. It's part of his specialized training. He's supposed to be able to distinguish between current and former police officers versus civilian criminals. Maybe he's just responding to her police background, Voss had suggested. No, ma'am. I've brought Rex through here dozens of times. He's never reacted to any of the other ex-cops that way. This was different, like he was recognizing her as someone from his operational environment. Officer Brooks had served as a military police dog handler before joining the corrections department. Rex had been trained for overseas deployment before being transferred to civilian service. The dog knows something we don't, Brooks concluded. Perhaps most significantly, there was the incident with Sarah Chen, a young inmate who'd been targeted for assault by a group trying to force her into prostitution. Sarah had been cornered in the showers when Samantha appeared. She didn't say anything, Sarah later told her cellmate. Just stepped between me and them. But the way she stood, it was like having a wall of protection suddenly appear. Those women took one look at her and walked away. Sarah's description was precise. She positioned herself at an angle that blocked their approach, but left herself multiple exit options. Her hands were loose at her sides, but I could see she was ready to move instantly. It was like watching a professional at work. The most intriguing evidence came from an unexpected source, the prison's maintenance supervisor, Carl Peterson. He'd been reviewing security footage for an unrelated incident when he noticed something odd about Samantha's daily routine. She's counting, he realized after watching several days of footage. Every day she walks the same route around the facility, but she's not just exercising, she's memorizing guard rotations, noting camera positions, timing security protocols. Peterson had served in military intelligence before his civilian career. He recognized reconnaissance behavior when he saw it. The question is whether she's planning an escape or just maintaining operational awareness out of habit, he told Dr. Morgan confidentially. All of these observations remained fragmented, shared only among small groups of staff members. No one had assembled the full picture because each person only saw pieces of a much larger puzzle. But the pieces were accumulating. Tommy Vasquez and Jackson Miller had begun quietly documenting their observations, convinced that Samantha Rivers was not who she claimed to be. Cops don't move like special operations, Tommy insisted. They don't have that level of situational awareness, tactical thinking, or combat readiness. Whatever she really is, it's way above street-level law enforcement. Dr. Morgan was reaching similar conclusions through her psychological assessments. Her stress responses are consistent with someone who's experienced extreme trauma, she noted in her confidential files, but not the kind of trauma associated with police corruption or even standard law enforcement duty. This looks more like combat-related PTSD, possibly involving prolonged exposure to life-threatening situations. The inconsistencies were becoming impossible to ignore. Samantha Rivers had skills, knowledge, and behavioral patterns that didn't match her official background. She moved like military special operations, thought like intelligence personnel, and carried herself like someone accustomed to life-or-death decision-making. But none of them could imagine the truth that was about to surface from halfway around the world. In just a few days, a single phone call would connect all these mysterious pieces into a picture so shocking that it would transform not only how they saw Samantha Rivers, but how they understood the meaning of heroism itself. For now, though, the clues remained scattered and unexplained, noticed only by the observant few who sensed that inmate 4477 was hiding something extraordinary beneath her quiet exterior. The nightmares started 3 weeks into Samantha's imprisonment, and they told a story that didn't match her official file. Officer Martinez was making his rounds during the 2 a.m. security check when he heard muffled shouting from cell 247. Through the observation window, he could see Samantha thrashing in her sleep, speaking rapidly in what sounded like a foreign language. Checkpoint Alpha compromised. Need immediate extraction. Civilians in the bus. Her voice was urgent but controlled, even in sleep. Falcon down, Falcon down. I'm going back for them. Martinez had heard plenty of inmates talk in their sleep, usually rambling about drugs, money, or family. This was different. This sounded like military communications. When Samantha jolted awake, her eyes swept the cell, with the trained alertness of someone expecting immediate danger. It took her several seconds to remember where she was, and Martinez saw her deliberately slow her breathing, using what looked like advanced stress management techniques. "Just a dream," she whispered to herself, but Martinez noticed her hands were trembling. The episodes became more frequent and more revealing. Her cellmate, Rosa Martinez, a soft-spoken woman serving time for embezzlement, began documenting what she heard during these nocturnal episodes. "She talks about helicopters a lot," Rosa confided to Dr. Morgan during a group session. "Something about Package Delta and getting people to safety. Last night she kept repeating coordinates and asking someone named Phoenix 6 for covering fire." Dr. Morgan requested permission to conduct late-night observations. What she witnessed convinced her that Samantha Rivers was experiencing severe combat-related trauma. "She sleeps in a defensive position," Dr. Morgan noted in her confidential report. "Always facing the door, never fully relaxed. When she has episodes, she's not reliving police work. She's reliving military operations, complex ones involving civilian evacuation and combat situations." The physical manifestations were equally telling. During a routine medical check, Nurse Kim noticed that Samantha's resting heart rate was unusually low. Athlete-level conditioning that suggested intensive physical training maintained over years. "Your cardiovascular fitness is exceptional," Nurse Kim observed. "Do you have a background in competitive sports?" "I try to stay in shape. This level of conditioning requires serious training. Marathon running? Military service?" Samantha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just regular exercise." But Nurse Kim had worked with enough veterans to recognize the signs. Samantha's muscle development was consistent with someone who'd undergone extreme physical conditioning, the kind developed through specialized military training programs. More revealing were the scars that Samantha tried to keep hidden. During a mandatory shower inspection, Officer Hayes noticed additional markings that hadn't been documented during intake. "Rope burns around her ankles," Hayes reported to Warden Voss. "Looks like she was restrained for extended periods. Also, what appears to be a knife wound across her right shoulder blade. Defensive wound, like she was fighting someone off." When questioned about these injuries, Samantha became even more evasive. "Old accidents, I'd rather not discuss them." "These look like assault injuries, Samantha. If you were a victim of violence before your incarceration, we need that information for your safety here. They're not relevant to my current situation." But Dr. Morgan suspected they were extremely relevant. The pattern of injuries suggested someone who'd been captured and tortured, possibly during military deployment. The language skills were another puzzle piece. Mrs. Foster, the librarian, had expanded her observations beyond Samantha's reading choices to her linguistic abilities. She was helping another inmate with a legal document written in Spanish, Mrs. Foster reported. Her translation was fluent, but more than that, she understood legal terminology and complex sentence structures. That's not high school Spanish. Even more intriguing, during a documentary about Middle Eastern conflicts shown during recreational time, Samantha had unconsciously provided real-time translation of Arabic dialogue. "She wasn't even trying to show off," observed Tommy Vasquez, who'd been sitting nearby. "The subtitles were wrong, and she automatically corrected them under her breath. That's native-level fluency in a language most Americans never learn." Jackson Miller had been testing his theory about Samantha's background by casually mentioning military locations and operations during yard time conversations. "When I was stationed at Bagram," he'd started one day. Samantha's response had been immediate and revealing. North or South Gate, the south entrance was always a bottleneck during convoy operations. She'd caught herself immediately, but the damage was done. Jackson had never mentioned which military base he'd meant, yet Samantha had provided specific operational details about Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. Only someone who'd been there would know about the gate configurations, Jackson told Tommy later, and she talked about convoy operations like she'd run them personally. The most disturbing evidence came from Samantha's response to unexpected loud noises. During a plumbing repair that involved jackhammering, most inmates had complained about the noise and disruption. Samantha had immediately moved to a corner position where she could observe all entrances, her hands unconsciously positioning themselves as if reaching for weapons that weren't there. Classic combat stress response, Tommy recognized. She's trained to react to potential incoming fire. That jackhammer sound triggered her threat assessment protocols. Dr. Morgan began incorporating specific trauma indicators into her sessions with Samantha, trying to understand the scope of what she'd experienced. "Have you ever been in a situation where you feared for your life over extended periods?" Everyone in law enforcement faces dangerous situations. I'm talking about prolonged exposure to life-threatening circumstances, days or weeks of constant danger. A long pause. I'd prefer to focus on adapting to prison life rather than dwelling on the past. Samantha, your sleep patterns and stress responses suggest you've experienced severe trauma, possibly combat-related. If you were involved in military service, I was never in the military. The response was too quick, too emphatic. I didn't say you were, but trauma symptoms don't discriminate based on the source. Whether it was police work, military service, or civilian experiences, we can work together to help you process. I don't need help processing anything. But her behavior suggested otherwise. Carl Peterson, the maintenance supervisor, had been documenting more of Samantha's reconnaissance patterns. She's not just memorizing our security procedures, he realized. She's identifying weaknesses and developing contingency plans. Look at these movement patterns. She's calculated optimal routes for emergency evacuation, defensive positions if the facility were attacked, and resource locations for extended survival scenarios. Peterson shared his analysis with Dr. Morgan. This isn't escape planning. This is someone maintaining operational readiness out of deeply ingrained habit. She's thinking like military intelligence, even though she's supposedly an ex-cop. The emotional indicators were equally revealing. Rosa Martinez had begun noticing that Samantha received no visitors, made no phone calls, and never discussed family or friends. "It's like she doesn't exist outside these walls," Rosa told Dr. Morgan, "but sometimes she stares at her hands and gets this look, like she's remembering people she cares about but can't contact them." During one particularly severe nightmare episode, Rosa heard something that chilled her. "Tell my unit I tried to get them out. Tell Phoenix 6 it wasn't his fault. The children are safe. The children are safe." The combination of guilt, responsibility for others' safety, and references to protecting children suggested someone who'd been in leadership positions during humanitarian crises. Dr. Morgan was beginning to suspect that Samantha Rivers wasn't just hiding military service. She was hiding significant military service, the kind that involved classified operations, specialized training, and experiences that would explain her extraordinary skill set. Her psychological profile is consistent with special operations personnel, Dr. Morgan confided to Nurse Kim. Someone who's been in command positions during high-stress operations involving civilian protection. But the most revealing incident occurred when a new inmate, Jennifer Walsh, arrived at Thornfield with severe PTSD from her military service in Iraq. Jennifer was having a panic attack during intake, hyperventilating and becoming combative with staff. Samantha, who was mopping nearby, had immediately recognized the signs. "May I?" she'd asked Officer Hayes, then approached Jennifer with calm authority. "Soldier, look at me. You're safe now. You're stateside. Count your breaths with me. 4 in, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique worked instantly. Jennifer calmed down, focusing on Samantha's voice and following her breathing instructions. "Thank you, ma'am," Jennifer had said automatically, then looked confused. "Are you—" "Just someone who understands," Samantha had replied quietly, then returned to her mopping as if nothing had happened. Officer Hayes was stunned. "That was textbook crisis intervention for military PTSD. Where did you learn that?" "Basic psychology." "That wasn't basic anything. That was specialized training for dealing with combat trauma." But Samantha had already walked away, leaving Officer Hayes with more questions than answers. All of these incidents were creating a picture that didn't match inmate 445's official background. The staff members who'd been paying attention were starting to compare notes, and what they were discovering suggested that Samantha Rivers was not only hiding military service, she was hiding extraordinary military service, the kind that might explain why a supposedly corrupt cop had skills that exceeded most special operations personnel they'd encountered. But the truth was still locked away in classified files that none of them could access, and Samantha seemed determined to take her secrets to whatever grave awaited her in the prison system. That determination was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The crisis began at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, when the emergency alarms started blaring throughout Thornfield Correctional. A massive industrial accident at the nearby Hartwell chemical plant had resulted in multiple casualties being rushed to area hospitals, but the closest medical facility was already overwhelmed. "All available medical personnel report to the main gate," came the announcement over the prison's PA system. We're establishing a temporary triage station to assist with overflow casualties. Warden Voss had made the controversial decision to allow the prison medical bay to serve as an emergency treatment center, bringing civilian casualties onto the grounds for stabilization before transport to larger hospitals. The prison's small medical staff, Nurse Kim, Dr. Patricia Voss, and 2 orderlies, were quickly overwhelmed as ambulances began arriving with burn victims, chemical exposure cases, and workers suffering from smoke inhalation and crush injuries. Samantha was working her shift in the laundry facility when she heard the commotion outside. Through the windows, she could see the chaos unfolding in the prison yard, medical personnel running between ambulances, victims on stretchers, and the clear signs of a medical emergency that was rapidly spiraling beyond the facility's capacity to handle. "Holy shit, look at all those ambulances," muttered her work partner Lisa Chen, pressing her face to the window. Something bad must have happened. Samantha moved to the window and immediately assessed the situation with trained eyes. She could see at least 12 casualties visible from her vantage point, with more arriving every few minutes. The prison's medical staff was clearly overwhelmed. Nurse Kim was trying to triage multiple patients simultaneously while Dr. Wells was performing emergency procedures on someone with severe burns. What caught Samantha's attention was the chaos in the triage process. Patients were being treated in order of arrival rather than severity of injury, and she could see critical mistakes being made from her position 50 yards away. "That man with the blue shirt needs immediate airway management," she whispered to herself, watching a chemical exposure victim who was clearly in respiratory distress being passed over for someone with more obvious but less life-threatening injuries. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway of the laundry facility. "All inmates return to your cells immediately. We're implementing emergency lockdown procedures." As the inmates filed out, Samantha lingered, continuing to observe the medical crisis through the window. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and her entire body was tense with the effort of staying put while her training screamed at her to intervene. The lockdown kept inmates confined to their cells, but the windows in D Block faced the makeshift triage area, giving them front row seats to the unfolding disaster. "This is fucked up," Rosa muttered from her bunk, watching the chaos below. "That doctor lady looks like she's about to collapse." Samantha was standing at the window, her face pressed against the glass, every muscle in her body coiled with tension. She could see exactly what was going wrong and knew how to fix it, but she was trapped behind locked doors and concrete walls. A new ambulance arrived carrying what appeared to be a family, 2 adults and 3 children who'd been overcome by chemical fumes. The children were loaded onto gurneys, but there was no one available to treat them immediately. That's when Samantha snapped. "Officer!" she called out, banging on her cell door. "Officer Martinez!" Martinez appeared at the end of the corridor. "What's the problem, Rivers?" "I need to speak with Dr. Wells immediately. There's something critical she needs to know about chemical exposure treatment. You're in lockdown. Whatever it is can wait. Those children down there are going to die if someone doesn't establish proper decontamination protocols in the next 10 minutes. Martinez looked confused. "How would you know anything about that?" "Please just get Dr. Wells on the radio. Ask her if she's established separate ventilation for chemical exposure victims. Ask her if she's monitoring for delayed respiratory reactions." Something in Samantha's voice made Martinez pause. There was an authority there that he'd never heard before, a certainty that suggested specialized knowledge. "Stay here," he said, then spoke into his radio. Minutes passed while Samantha watched the situation deteriorate. One of the children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, was clearly going into respiratory failure. She could see his chest movements becoming more labored, his skin taking on the bluish tint of oxygen deprivation. "They're treating him for smoke inhalation," she said to Rosa, her voice tight with frustration. But chemical exposure requires different protocols. His airways are swelling from the inside. Standard oxygen therapy isn't going to be enough. Officer Martinez returned with Officer Hayes and, to Samantha's surprise, Dr. Wells herself. Officer Martinez says you have information about treating chemical exposure, Dr. Wells said through the cell door. She looked exhausted and desperate. Those children were exposed to industrial solvents, not just smoke, Samantha said urgently. The youngest boy is going into laryngeal edema. You need to prepare for emergency intubation, but standard procedures won't work because the swelling is chemical-induced, not thermal. Dr. Wells stared at her. How do you know that? You need to use a smaller tube than normal and consider steroid intervention to reduce inflammation. Also, the decontamination process needs to include eye irrigation, even if they're not showing symptoms yet. Chemical burns to the cornea can present hours after initial exposure. Where did you learn this? Samantha hesitated for just a moment. I had advanced emergency medical training. What kind of training? Another pause. Military field medicine. Dr. Wells looked skeptical. You're not in our files as having any medical background. Please, Samantha said, her composure finally cracking. I can see what's happening from here. That boy doesn't have much time, and your triage system isn't prioritizing correctly. The man in the red jacket has third-degree burns but stable vitals. He can wait. The woman with the head injury needs immediate CT scan. She's showing signs of increased intracranial pressure, and those chemical exposure victims need isolation ventilation, or you're going to contaminate your entire medical bay. Dr. Wells was staring at her with growing amazement. Every observation Samantha was making was medically accurate and showed a level of expertise that extended far beyond basic first aid. Officer Hayes, unlock this cell. Ma'am, I can't release an inmate during emergency lockdown without authorization from... Get Warden Voss on the radio now. While they waited for authorization, Samantha continued her remote triage assessment. The elderly man on stretcher 3 is going into shock. You can see it in his skin color and the way his hands are positioned. He needs immediate IV fluids and blood pressure support. And somebody needs to check the teenage girl who came in 20 minutes ago. She's conscious and talking, so she got triaged as low priority, but she's showing signs of internal bleeding. Every prediction Samantha made proved accurate as Dr. Wells verified the conditions through binoculars. Warden Voss arrived within minutes, her face flushed with the stress of managing both the emergency response and the security implications of bringing civilians into the prison. Dr. Wells says you have medical expertise that could help with the emergency, Voss said to Samantha. I do. Your file says you were a police officer. My file doesn't tell the whole story. Voss studied her for a long moment. Outside, the crisis was worsening as more ambulances arrived, and the medical staff became increasingly overwhelmed. If I release you to assist with this emergency, you'll be under constant guard, and any attempt to escape will result in additional charges. Understood. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about your background. Yes, ma'am. Officer Hayes unlocked the cell door, and Samantha stepped out into the hallway. As they walked toward the medical area, her entire demeanor began to change. Her posture straightened, her stride became more purposeful, and when she spoke to give directions, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. I'll need a full briefing on current casualties, available resources, and transport capabilities, she told Dr. Wells as they approached the triage area. Also, have you contacted the Regional Poison Control Center about the specific chemicals involved in the plant accident? Dr. Wells was struggling to keep up with both the pace of Samantha's questions and the sophistication of her medical knowledge. We've been too busy treating patients to coordinate with outside resources. That needs to happen immediately. Some of these chemical exposures are going to present delayed symptoms that require specialized treatment protocols. As they entered the medical bay, Samantha surveyed the scene with professional eyes. In seconds, she had assessed the entire situation and begun prioritizing interventions based on a complex understanding of trauma medicine that left the entire medical staff stunned. "Ma'am," Officer Hayes said quietly to Warden Voss, "that's not a police officer. I don't know what she is, but that's military medical training at a very high level." Warden Voss nodded grimly, watching as Samantha began directing the emergency response with casual expertise that transformed the entire operation. For the first time since her arrival at Thornfield, the mask was slipping away from Samantha Rivers, and what was emerging underneath was far more complex and impressive than anyone had imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The question was no longer who she was pretending to be, but who she really was, and why someone with her obvious qualifications was serving time for murdering a police officer. The chemical plant emergency had been successfully managed, largely due to Samantha's intervention. 17 lives had been saved through her expert triage decisions and advanced medical protocols. But instead of recognition, Warden Voss saw something that needed to be crushed immediately. Inmate Rivers thinks she can manipulate emergency situations to gain special privileges, Voss announced during the next morning's staff briefing. Yesterday's performance was clearly calculated to make us lower our guard and view her as indispensable. Dr. Wells tried to object. "Patricia, her medical knowledge saved lives. Those children would have died without her intervention." "Dr. Wells, I understand you're grateful, but we cannot allow inmates to believe they can earn special treatment through dramatic gestures." Rivers overstepped her boundaries, assumed authority she doesn't possess, and manipulated a crisis situation for personal gain. The truth was more complex than Warden Voss wanted to admit. Samantha's display of expertise had been so far beyond what any normal inmate should possess that it threatened the entire power structure of the prison. If word spread that inmate 4477 had essentially taken command of a medical emergency and outperformed trained professionals, it would undermine the administration's authority. "She made us look incompetent," Voss confided to her assistant warden later. 17 people are alive because a convicted murderer knew more about emergency medicine than our entire medical staff. That's not a story we can allow to circulate. The decision was made to not just punish Samantha for overstepping her bounds, but to make an example of her that would ensure no other inmate would ever attempt to assert expertise or authority during future emergencies. "We're going to remind Rivers exactly who she is and where she belongs," Voss declared. The pretext came 2 days later during a routine cell inspection. Officer Bradley, who had been looking for any excuse to target Samantha since the ice water incident, claimed to have found contraband in her cell. "Homemade medical supplies," he announced, holding up strips of cloth that Samantha had torn from her spare shirt to practice emergency bandaging techniques, a habit left over from her military training. "These could be used as weapons or for escape purposes," Bradley continued, though everyone present knew the strips of cotton posed no actual threat. "Possession of contraband, attempting to manufacture unauthorized materials, and potential escape planning," Warden Voss pronounced. 30 days in solitary confinement. The punishment was disproportionate to the alleged offense, and several staff members knew it. Dr. Wells protested directly to Warden Voss. This is retaliation for her helping during the emergency. Those cloth strips were obviously for medical practice, not contraband. Dr. Wells, your judgment regarding Rivers has been compromised by her manipulation during the crisis. She's a convicted murderer, not a medical professional, and treating her as anything else is dangerous naivety. Even Officer Martinez, who generally supported administrative decisions, felt the punishment was excessive. 30 days seems harsh for some torn cloth, he mentioned to Officer Hayes. Voss wants to break her, Hayes replied. Make sure she never gets above her station again. But what truly shocked the staff was how Warden Voss chose to implement the solitary confinement. Standard solitary isn't sufficient for someone who clearly believes rules don't apply to her, Voss announced. Rivers will be placed in disciplinary isolation under enhanced conditions. Enhanced conditions meant the underground isolation cells in the basement of the facility, windowless concrete boxes that were only used for the most violent and dangerous inmates. These cells were deliberately designed to break the spirit of anyone placed in them. That's cruel and unusual punishment, Dr. Morgan protested. Those cells aren't appropriate for someone whose only offense was possessing cloth strips. Dr. Morgan, Rivers has demonstrated that she considers herself above institutional authority. She needs to be reminded of her true position. The transfer to the basement isolation occurred at midnight to avoid witnesses among the general population. Samantha was stripped, searched thoroughly, and given only a thin prison gown before being escorted to cell 7 in the basement level. The cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, with a concrete slab for a bed, a hole in the floor for waste, and a small slot in the door for food delivery. There was no window, no natural light, and no ventilation beyond a small grate near the ceiling. "Welcome to your new home," Officer Bradley sneered as he locked the heavy steel door. "Let's see how special you feel after a few weeks down here." The first week was designed to establish complete hopelessness. Samantha was awakened every 2 hours throughout the night for security checks that prevented any sustained sleep. Her meals were deliberately irregular, sometimes arriving early in the morning, sometimes late at night, disrupting any sense of time or routine. The temperature in the basement was kept uncomfortably cold, and the thin gown provided no warmth. Samantha was forced to exercise constantly just to maintain body heat, but the confined space made meaningful physical activity nearly impossible. "How's our celebrity inmate adjusting?" Warden Voss asked Officer Bradley during his weekly report. "She's maintaining that same calm attitude, but it's starting to crack. I can see the stress building." "Good. Continue the current protocols." By the second week, the psychological pressure was intensified. The lights in the cell were kept on 24 hours a day, making sleep even more difficult. The food portions were reduced, and water was limited to 3 cups per day. Enough to survive, but not enough to feel comfortable. Samantha began showing visible signs of the stress. Her face became gaunt, her hands developed a slight tremor, and her voice became hoarse from the dry air and limited water. Dr. Morgan was permitted a weekly psychological evaluation and was horrified by what she observed. "This is torture," she reported to Warden Voss. "The conditions in that cell violate basic human rights standards." Dr. Morgan, Rivers is receiving standard disciplinary isolation treatment. "There's nothing standard about this. You're systematically breaking down her physical and psychological health. She needs to understand that her previous behavior will not be tolerated." Her previous behavior was saving 17 lives, but Warden Voss had made her decision, and she wasn't interested in contrary opinions. The breaking point was designed to come during the 3rd week when the ice water treatments began. Under the guise of decontamination procedures, Samantha was forced to strip naked while guards poured buckets of ice water over her shivering body. "This is for your own safety," Officer Bradley explained mockingly. "We need to ensure you're not hiding any more contraband." The water treatments occurred twice daily, leaving Samantha constantly wet and cold in the unheated cell. Her lips turned blue, her body shook uncontrollably, and for the first time since arriving at Thornfield, her composure began to visibly crack. "Please," she whispered after one particularly brutal session, "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's where you're mistaken," Bradley replied. "You thought you could make us look bad by playing doctor during the emergency. Now you're learning what happens to inmates who forget their place." Word of Samantha's treatment began to spread among the staff, and several were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "This isn't correction," Officer Martinez confided to Nurse Kim. "This is deliberate cruelty." "I've tried to intervene," Kim replied, "but Voss won't listen to medical concerns." Even some of the guards who had initially supported harsh treatment for Samantha were beginning to question the methods. "She's not fighting back," Officer Rodriguez observed. "She's not causing trouble or demanding special treatment. She's just enduring whatever we do to her. That's not normal inmate behavior." "Maybe that's because she's not a normal inmate," Officer Hayes replied quietly. By the fourth week, Samantha's physical condition had deteriorated significantly. She had lost nearly 20 pounds. Her skin was pale and marked with bruises from the concrete floor, and she showed signs of severe dehydration despite the limited water they provided. Dr. Wells demanded a medical examination and was appalled by what she found. "This woman is suffering from hypothermia, malnutrition, and severe dehydration," she reported to Warden Voss. "If these conditions continue, she could suffer permanent health damage or death." "Dr. Wells, you're being overly dramatic. Thousands of inmates have served time in disciplinary isolation without serious medical consequences." "Not under these conditions. The ice water treatments, sleep deprivation, and restricted nutrition constitute torture by any medical definition." But Warden Voss was unmoved. In her mind, Samantha Rivers represented a challenge to institutional authority that had to be completely crushed. What none of them knew was that half a world away, a series of events was unfolding that would soon transform their understanding of exactly who they were torturing in the basement of Thornfield Correctional. A phone call was coming that would reveal the true identity of inmate 4477, and when it arrived, everyone involved in her treatment would face consequences they never could have imagined. But for now, Samantha Rivers lay shivering on the concrete floor of Cell 7, her body broken but her spirit still intact, enduring treatment that would have destroyed most people while maintaining the silence that protected secrets worth killing for. The ice water was about to stop flowing, but not because of mercy or policy changes. It was about to stop because someone was finally going to whisper the truth that would change everything. The call came at 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, interrupting Warden Voss as she reviewed budget reports in her office. Her secretary's voice carried an unusual tension through the intercom. "Ma'am, I have Colonel James Morrison from the Pentagon on line 1. He says it's urgent and classified." Voss frowned. Pentagon officials didn't typically contact state correctional facilities, especially not about urgent classified matters. "Put him through." "Warden Voss, this is Colonel Morrison, Pentagon Special Operations Command. I need to speak with you immediately about one of your inmates, Samantha Rivers, currently serving time for murder." Voss felt a chill run down her spine. "What about her?" "Ma'am, I need to verify her location and current status. Our intelligence indicates she may be in immediate danger." "Danger, Colonel? I'm not sure I understand." "Rivers is a convicted murderer serving 15 years for killing a police officer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Warden Voss, whoever told you that is either seriously misinformed or deliberately lying. Samantha Rivers is Lieutenant Commander Samantha Rivers, Navy SEAL, Medal of Honor recipient, and the operative who saved over 800 civilians during the evacuation of Kabul. The words hit Voss like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in her chair, staring at Samantha's file on her desk. The file that showed a corrupt police officer, not a decorated war hero. That's impossible. Her file clearly states, "Ma'am, with respect, I don't care what her file states. I'm looking at classified Pentagon records right now. Lieutenant Commander Rivers disappeared 18 months ago while testifying in a classified hearing about war crimes. She was placed in witness protection after receiving credible death threats from international arms dealers she helped expose." Voss's hands were shaking as she opened Samantha's file again, seeing it now in a completely different light. Her cover identity was supposed to be a civilian clerk in a federal building. Colonel Morrison continued. "How the hell did she end up in your prison on murder charges?" "The conviction was legitimate. She killed Detective Frank Morrison in Metro City." "Ma'am, Detective Frank Morrison is very much alive. I spoke with him this morning. He's the one who alerted us that someone using his name had been listed as a murder victim in connection with Lieutenant Commander Rivers." The room began spinning around Voss. Everything she thought she knew about Samantha Rivers was crumbling in real time. "Colonel, I need to understand what you're telling me. If she didn't kill anyone, if she's a decorated SEAL, then how?" "Someone with significant resources and government connections manufactured an entire criminal case to get her into your facility. The question is why, and more importantly, what they're planning to do to her there." The implications were staggering. Someone had created false evidence, fabricated witnesses, and manipulated the entire justice system to put a war hero in prison under false pretenses. "Where is she right now?" Morrison's voice was urgent. Voss hesitated. She's in disciplinary isolation." "For what?" "Contraband possession, some cloth strips." "Cloth strips?" Morrison's voice rose dangerously. "You put a Medal of Honor recipient in solitary confinement over cloth strips?" "We didn't know." "What are the conditions of her confinement?" Voss was beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation she was facing. Standard disciplinary protocols. "I need specifics, Warden. What exactly are you doing to her?" The line was quiet for several long seconds as Voss realized she was about to describe torture techniques to a Pentagon colonel. Enhanced isolation procedures, limited food and water, irregular sleep schedules, temperature control, and decontamination protocols. "What kind of decontamination protocols?" "Ice water treatments to prevent contraband concealment." The silence that followed was so complete that Voss wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Warden," Morrison's voice was ice cold when he finally spoke, "you've been torturing a United States war hero for a month based on fabricated criminal charges." Before Voss could respond, her secretary's voice came through the intercom again. "Ma'am, I have Admiral Sarah Chen from Naval Special Operations online. 2. She says Colonel Morrison asked her to call." "Put her through on conference," Voss said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Warden Voss, this is Admiral Chen. I understand you're holding Lieutenant Commander Samantha Rivers. I need her released to federal custody immediately." "Admiral, we've just been discussing the situation with Colonel Morrison. There seems to be some confusion about her identity." "There's no confusion. Lieutenant Commander Rivers is one of the most decorated special operations personnel in Navy history. She led the civilian evacuation from Kabul International Airport during the Taliban takeover, personally carrying wounded children to safety while under direct enemy fire. Admiral Chen's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. She saved over 800 lives in a single operation, including 47 American civilians and dozens of Afghan allies. She held off Taliban forces for 6 hours while evacuation helicopters ferried people to safety. She was wounded 3 times during the operation and refused medical evacuation until every civilian was secure. Warden Voss felt sick as she processed this information while mentally reviewing the torture they'd been inflicting on a war hero. The arms dealers she helped expose during her testimony have connections to organized crime and corrupt government officials, Colonel Morrison added. Someone used those connections to manufacture her criminal case and get her isolated where they could eliminate her without federal protection. Eliminate her? Voss's voice was barely audible. Ma'am, you need to understand. The people who want Lieutenant Commander Rivers dead have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. Getting her convicted of murdering a police officer and sent to a state prison was probably the most efficient way to arrange her death. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the confusion. Warden, I need you to verify her current physical condition immediately. If she's been harmed, there will be consequences at the highest levels of government. Voss was staring at her hands, realizing that she had personally authorized the torture of a Medal of Honor recipient based on completely fabricated criminal charges. She's been in enhanced disciplinary isolation for 4 weeks. What does that mean specifically? Admiral Chen's voice was deadly quiet. Solitary confinement in the basement level, limited food and water, interrupted sleep, cold temperatures, and twice daily ice water treatments. The silence from both Pentagon officials was terrifying. You've been waterboarding a Navy SEAL, Colonel Morrison finally said, a decorated war hero who saved 800 lives. We didn't know. Warden, Admiral Chen interrupted. I'm dispatching a federal extraction team to your facility immediately. Lieutenant Commander Rivers will be removed to federal medical custody within the hour. You and your staff will remain available for questioning by federal investigators. But the legal procedures were fabricated, Morrison said bluntly. Every piece of evidence in her case was manufactured. The witnesses were paid actors. The crime scene was staged. Someone spent millions of dollars to create a fake murder case that would put her in your custody. Voss was barely processing the information. The scale of the conspiracy was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her real name isn't even Samantha Rivers, Admiral Chen added. That was her cover identity for the Witness Protection Program. Her actual identity is classified, but I can tell you that she's considered one of the most valuable special operations assets in the United States military. The phone in Voss's office rang again. Her secretary's panicked voice came through. Ma'am, I have vehicles pulling up to the front gate. Military vehicles with federal plates. Through her office window, Voss could see 3 black SUVs and a military transport vehicle approaching the prison entrance. Armed federal agents were already exiting the vehicles. That would be the extraction team, Colonel Morrison said calmly. Warden, you have about 3 minutes to get Lieutenant Commander Rivers out of that basement cell and into medical custody before federal agents take control of your facility. Voss was already reaching for her radio. Officer Martinez, I need inmate Rivers brought to the medical bay immediately. Full medical evaluation, now. Ma'am, she's scheduled for her next ice water treatment. Cancel everything. Get her out of that cell right now. As she ran toward the medical bay, Warden Voss's mind was reeling with the implications. She had tortured a war hero. Her career was over. Criminal charges were possible. But more immediately, she was about to face federal agents who would want to know why she had been systematically abusing one of America's most decorated military personnel. The extraction team was already at the front entrance when she reached the medical bay, where Dr. Wells was frantically preparing for what she now understood was the medical evaluation of a Navy SEAL who had been subjected to torture for a month. Everything was about to change at Thornfield Correctional, and Warden Voss was beginning to understand that her decision to break Samantha Rivers had instead broken her own career and possibly her freedom. The hero they had tried to destroy was about to be revealed, and the consequences would reach levels of government that Voss had never imagined. Officer Martinez burst through the medical bay doors carrying Samantha's emaciated form, her body limp and barely conscious after 4 weeks of systematic torture. Dr. Wells gasped when she saw the condition of the woman she now knew was a decorated Navy SEAL. "Jesus Christ," Wells whispered, immediately beginning emergency assessment. "Get her on the examination table. Start an IV line. Check her core temperature." Behind them, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the prison corridors as federal agents swept through the facility. The lead agent, Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's Crimes Against Government Personnel Unit, entered the medical bay with 3 Navy personnel, including a medical officer. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, Navy Medical Corps, the Navy doctor, introduced herself, immediately taking over Samantha's care. "I need a full briefing on her condition and treatment history." Dr. Wells was shaking as she handed over Samantha's medical chart. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, signs of hypothermia, and what appears to be psychological trauma from prolonged isolation and enhanced interrogation techniques. "Enhanced interrogation?" Agent Torres's voice was ice cold. "You mean torture?" Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was conducting her examination with practiced efficiency, documenting injuries while providing immediate care. Multiple contusions consistent with sleeping on concrete surfaces. Severe weight loss, approximately 25 pounds below normal body weight. Signs of chronic stress and sleep deprivation. Warden Voss arrived, flanked by 2 federal agents, just as Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was checking Samantha's reflexes. "Warden Voss," Agent Torres said without looking up from her tablet, "I'm placing you under federal investigation for violations of civil rights under color of authority, conspiracy to commit torture, and potential treason charges related to the abuse of military personnel." "I had no idea who she really was," Voss said weakly. "That's irrelevant. You authorized torture based on fabricated charges. Your ignorance doesn't absolve you of responsibility." On the examination table, Samantha stirred slightly, her eyes opening for the first time in days. When she saw Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's Navy uniform, confusion flickered across her gaunt features. "Lieutenant Commander," Mitchell said gently, "you're safe now. You're with Navy medical personnel. Can you tell me your real name?" Samantha's voice was barely a whisper. "Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Kane, Navy SEAL Team 6, service number 4471, Bravo Sierra." The name hit everyone in the room like a physical force. Agent Torres looked up from her tablet, eyes wide. "Alexandra Kane? The Alexandra Kane?" Lieutenant Commander Mitchell nodded grimly. "The youngest person ever to receive both the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. Operation Nightingale in Kabul. She single-handedly held off Taliban forces while evacuating 847 civilians." Dr. Wells felt her knees go weak as the full scope of what had happened began to sink in. They had tortured America's most decorated female special operations officer. "But that's not even the most classified part," Agent Torres continued, consulting her secure tablet. "Lieutenant Commander Kane was the lead operative in Operation Phoenix, the mission that eliminated the terrorist cell responsible for the embassy bombings in Syria and Lebanon." Warden Voss was staring at the woman on the examination table, the same woman she had personally ordered stripped and tortured with ice water just hours earlier. She also led the rescue operation that saved 32 hostages from the Iranian proxy forces in Iraq, Torres added, including Senator Mitchell's daughter. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell paused in her examination. Senator Mitchell, that's my father. The implications were staggering. They had tortured the woman who had saved a United States senator's daughter. Colonel Morrison entered the medical bay, having arrived with additional Pentagon personnel. His face was grim as he assessed the situation. Lieutenant Commander Kane, he said formally, on behalf of the United States Navy and the Pentagon, I apologize for the failure of our protective protocols that allowed this situation to occur. Alexandra, no longer hiding behind the identity of Samantha Rivers, managed a weak nod. Colonel, how did you find me? Detective Morrison, the man whose murder you were supposedly convicted of, started investigating when he heard his own death had been reported. He contacted federal authorities when he discovered the fabricated case. Agent Torres was documenting everything with her camera and recording equipment. Lieutenant Commander, we need to understand exactly what was done to you here. Your testimony will be crucial for the federal case against the conspiracy that placed you here. Alexandra's voice was stronger now, though still hoarse from dehydration. The cover story was supposed to be a federal clerk position in witness protection. I was testifying about war crimes committed by Blackwater contractors and arms dealers with connections to organized crime. Someone with access to high-level government systems created an entire false identity for you as a corrupt police officer, Colonel Morrison explained. They manufactured evidence, bribed witnesses, and manipulated the justice system to get you isolated in state custody, where you could be eliminated without federal oversight. The medical bay was filling with additional personnel as the scope of the operation became clear. 2 more FBI agents, a representative from the Judge Advocate General's office, and a stenographer to document everything officially. The operation was sophisticated beyond anything we've seen, Agent Torres explained to the gathering crowd. They created false police reports dating back 2 years, fabricated DNA evidence, paid actors to pose as witnesses, and even produced fake autopsy reports for Detective Morrison. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had completed her initial examination and was conferring with Dr. Wells about treatment protocols. She'll need immediate hospitalization, Mitchell announced. The torture has caused significant physical trauma, but more concerning is the potential for long-term psychological effects from prolonged isolation and abuse. I'm fine, Alexandra said, attempting to sit up. I've endured worse during SEER training and actual combat operations. Ma'am, with respect, SEER training doesn't last a month and it's not conducted by people trying to break you permanently, Mitchell replied. Colonel Morrison approached the examination table. Lieutenant Commander, we need to discuss your security situation. The people who arranged this are still out there, and they now know their plan failed. What people exactly? Alexandra asked. International arms dealers working with corrupt U.S. officials. Your testimony was going to expose a network that includes defense contractors, foreign agents, and at least 3 members of Congress. Agent Torres added, the conspiracy reaches into the Pentagon, State Department, and private military contractors, someone with access to witness protection protocols and federal prison systems. The scope was overwhelming. Alexandra had been placed in witness protection, only to have that protection turned into a trap by the very people she was protected from. How many people were involved in getting me here? She asked. At minimum, we're looking at conspiracy charges for 12 individuals, including 2 federal prosecutors, 1 federal judge, 4 law enforcement officers, and at least 5 civilian contractors, Torres replied. Warden Voss was listening to all of this in horror, realizing she had been an unwitting participant in an international conspiracy. The ice water treatments, the sleep deprivation, the isolation, Colonel Morrison said to Voss, that wasn't random cruelty. Someone was paying your staff to implement specific torture protocols designed to break Lieutenant Commander Kane psychologically before they had her killed. That's impossible, Voss protested. My officers wouldn't. Officer Bradley has been receiving payments of $5,000 monthly for the past 6 months, Agent Torres interrupted, consulting her tablet. The payments came from a shell company connected to Blackwater contractors. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Alexandra been framed and imprisoned, but her torturers had been specifically recruited and paid to ensure her psychological destruction. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell said to Alexandra, we need to get you to Walter Reed Medical Center immediately. You're going to need extensive medical care and psychological support. As they prepared Alexandra for transport, Colonel Morrison made one final announcement that sent shockwaves through everyone present. Lieutenant Commander Kane's case is now classified at the highest levels of national security. Everyone involved in this investigation is bound by federal secrecy laws. Any disclosure of information related to her identity, location, or condition will result in treason charges. The woman they had known as Samantha Rivers, the quiet, supposedly corrupt police officer, was actually one of America's most valuable and decorated military assets, whose torture had been orchestrated by an international conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. And now the full weight of federal law enforcement was about to come down on everyone who had participated in her abuse. The transformation began the moment Alexandra Kane was wheeled into Walter Reed Medical Center. Within hours, the basement torture victim had become Lieutenant Commander Kane, and her presence commanded immediate respect from every medical professional who entered her room. I need a secure communication line to Pentagon operations, she told the attending physician, Dr. Sarah Hoffman, after receiving IV fluids and initial treatment. There are national security implications to my capture that require immediate attention. Despite her physical weakness, Alexandra's mental acuity was razor sharp. She began debriefing federal agents while still connected to monitoring equipment, providing detailed intelligence about the conspiracy that had targeted her. The arms-dealing network I was investigating has connections to 3 active terrorist organizations, she explained to Agent Torres and Colonel Morrison. My disappearance into the prison system gave them 18 months to relocate assets and eliminate evidence. Ma'am, you need to focus on recovery, Dr. Hoffman interjected. The debriefing can wait until... Doctor, with respect, every hour of delay gives these people more time to escape justice and potentially harm other operatives. Alexandra replied with quiet authority. I've been tracking this network for 3 years. My enforced absence has compromised multiple ongoing operations. Within 24 hours, Alexandra's hospital room had been converted into a secure command center. Pentagon officials, FBI agents, and CIA operatives rotated through constantly as she provided intelligence that had been missing from federal investigations for over a year. The Kabul evacuation operation she led saved more than civilians, Admiral Chen explained to the gathered intelligence officials. 3 of the people she evacuated were deep cover assets with intelligence about terrorist financing networks. Without her intervention, we would have lost crucial sources of information about international arms trafficking. The full scope of Alexandra's military achievements began emerging as classified files were reviewed by federal investigators. Her service record painted a picture of extraordinary heroism that made her torture at Thornfield even more shocking. Operation Nightingale wasn't her only major success. Colonel Morrison briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff via secure video conference. Lieutenant Commander Kane led 17 classified missions over 8 years, including the rescue operation that saved Ambassador Williams and her staff from Syrian rebels. General Patricia Hayes, chair of the Joint Chiefs, reviewed Alexandra's complete file with growing amazement. She has successful special operations missions than most entire SEAL teams. How was someone with this record vulnerable to a civilian conspiracy? Her effectiveness made her a target, Admiral Chen explained. The arms dealers she exposed were losing hundreds of millions in revenue due to her operations. They had every incentive to eliminate her and the resources to corrupt civilian law enforcement systems. Meanwhile, at Thornfield Correctional, the FBI investigation was revealing the full extent of the conspiracy. Agent Torres had established a command post in Warden Voss's former office, interviewing staff and analyzing evidence of the systematic torture program. Officer Bradley received over $60,000 in payments to implement specific torture protocols, Torres announced during a briefing with federal prosecutors. The payments came with detailed instructions on psychological breakdown techniques designed specifically for military personnel with SEER training. The sophistication of the conspiracy was staggering. Someone with intimate knowledge of military psychology had designed Alexandra's torture to exploit specific vulnerabilities in special operations training. They knew exactly how to break someone with her background, explained Dr. Amanda Price, a federal psychologist brought in to analyze the torture protocols. The ice water treatments, irregular feeding schedules, and isolation techniques were specifically chosen to overwhelm resistance training and induce learned helplessness. Back at Walter Reed, Alexandra was demonstrating exactly why such elaborate measures had been necessary to contain her. Despite weeks of torture, she was rapidly resuming her role as one of the military's most effective strategic assets. "I need access to our informant networks in Eastern Europe," she told Colonel Morrison during a secure briefing. "The arms dealers have been using my absence to restructure their operations, but they'll have left traces if we know where to look." "Ma'am, you're supposed to be recovering, not running intelligence operations from your hospital bed," Morrison replied. "Colonel, every day we delay gives them more time to eliminate evidence and escape justice. I didn't endure 4 weeks of torture to let these people disappear before we can prosecute them." Her dedication was inspiring federal agents who had worked with many military personnel but never seen someone transition so quickly from victim to operational commander. "She's remarkable," Agent Torres confided to Admiral Chen. "Most people would need months of therapy after what she endured. She's ready to resume active duty." The medical staff at Walter Reed was equally impressed. Despite significant weight loss and physical trauma, Alexandra's recovery was exceptionally rapid. "Her cardiovascular fitness and muscle memory are extraordinary," Dr. Hoffman reported. "She's regaining strength at a rate I've never seen in torture recovery cases." More importantly, Alexandra was providing intelligence that was already yielding results in ongoing federal investigations. "Based on her debriefing, we've identified 12 individuals involved in the conspiracy," Agent Torres announced during a conference call with Department of Justice officials. "We're executing arrest warrants simultaneously across 4 states. The arrests were coordinated to prevent the conspirators from warning each other. At 6 a.m. Eastern, federal agents simultaneously arrested 2 federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C., a federal judge in Virginia, 3 defense contractors in Texas, and 2 Pentagon officials in Maryland. "The scale of this conspiracy is unprecedented," announced Attorney General Robert Chen during a press conference. "We have evidence of systematic corruption involving federal law enforcement, military contractors, and foreign agents working together to eliminate a U.S. military operative." Meanwhile, Alexandra was coordinating with international intelligence agencies to track the broader arms-dealing network. The Syrian operation I disrupted was connected to weapons shipments we intercepted in Afghanistan, she explained to CIA Deputy Director Maria Santos via secure video link. My torture was part of a larger effort to restart those weapons flows by eliminating the operative who had disrupted them. The international implications were staggering. Alexandra's capture and torture hadn't just been personal revenge. It had been a strategic operation to remove the most effective counter-terrorism operative targeting international arms dealers. Lieutenant Commander Kane's missions over the past 3 years disrupted weapons shipments worth over $2 billion. Admiral Chen briefed Secretary of Defense Williams. Her elimination would have reopened crucial trafficking routes that fund terrorist organizations. At Thornfield Correctional, the investigation was revealing how deeply the corruption had penetrated the facility. Beyond Officer Bradley's direct payments, several other staff members had received financial incentives to participate in Alexandra's psychological destruction. The commissary manager was paid to ensure she received inadequate nutrition, Agent Torres discovered through financial records. The medical staff was incentivized to ignore signs of abuse. Even the laundry supervisor was compensated for monitoring her behavior and reporting on her psychological state. Dr. Wells, who had tried to intervene during Alexandra's torture, was cooperating fully with federal investigators. I knew something was wrong, she told Agent Torres. The orders coming from administration didn't follow normal medical protocols. When I objected, I was told it was classified federal guidance for handling dangerous inmates. The lies had been sophisticated enough to convince well-meaning staff members that they were following legitimate federal procedures rather than participating in torture. But now the truth was emerging, and Alexandra Kane was resuming her role as one of America's most valuable military assets. From her hospital bed, she was coordinating international operations that would bring down the conspiracy that had tried to destroy her. They made one crucial mistake, she told Colonel Morrison during their final briefing before her medical discharge. They assumed that 4 weeks of torture would break me permanently. Instead, they just gave me 4 weeks to think about exactly how I was going to bring down everyone involved in this conspiracy. The hunter had become the hunted, and Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Kane was about to demonstrate exactly why she was considered one of the most dangerous operatives in the U.S. military. Her ordeal was ending, but her mission for justice was just beginning. The story broke on every major news network simultaneously at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, coordinated by the Department of Justice to maximum impact. The headline was simple but devastating. Decorated Navy SEAL tortured in prison based on fabricated murder charges. Within minutes, the video footage began circulating. Security cameras from Thornfield Correctional had captured everything: the ice water treatments, the systematic abuse, the deliberate cruelty inflicted on a woman who had saved hundreds of lives in service to her country. This is CNN breaking news, announced anchor Sarah Mitchell. We have obtained exclusive footage showing the systematic torture of Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Kane, a Medal of Honor recipient who was imprisoned on fabricated murder charges as part of an international conspiracy. The footage was devastating. Viewers watched in horror as guards poured ice water on Alexandra's naked, shivering form while she begged for mercy. The contrast between her treatment and her actual heroic service record created an immediate public outcry. Social media exploded within hours. Justice for Alexandra began trending worldwide, with millions of Americans demanding accountability for everyone involved in her abuse. They tortured a hero, read one viral tweet with 2.3 million retweets. This woman saved 847 lives in Kabul, and they treated her like a terrorist. The video of Alexandra's medical expertise during the chemical plant emergency went viral next, showing her transforming from tortured prisoner to commanding medical professional in moments. The contrast was striking. 1 minute shivering in a basement cell, the next saving 17 lives with expert precision. "Watch this and tell me this woman deserved what they did to her," posted veteran advocate Maria Santos, sharing the medical emergency footage. The post received 5.7 million views in the first 6 hours. Major news outlets began releasing the classified details that had been cleared for public disclosure by the Pentagon. The scope of the conspiracy shocked even seasoned journalists. The fabrication of evidence in the Alexandra Kane case represents one of the most sophisticated frame jobs in American legal history, reported veteran correspondent James Wright on NBC Nightly News. Federal investigators have traced payments of over $3 million used to bribe witnesses, falsify evidence, and corrupt multiple levels of the justice system. The revelation that Detective Frank Morrison, the supposed murder victim, was alive and had helped expose the conspiracy added another layer of outrage to the story. "They literally fabricated my death to frame a war hero," Morrison told Anderson Cooper during a primetime CNN interview. "Someone created fake autopsy reports, staged crime scenes, and paid actors to pretend they witnessed my murder. It's beyond anything I thought possible in America." The international arms dealing connection transformed the story from a domestic injustice into a national security scandal. Revelations about corrupt Pentagon officials and defense contractors created bipartisan outrage in Congress. "This conspiracy reaches to the highest levels of our government," announced Senator Patricia Williams during an emergency press conference. "We are demanding immediate hearings and accountability for everyone involved in this systematic abuse of a decorated military hero." The public reaction was swift and merciless. Thornfield Correctional became the target of massive protests as veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and military families demanded justice. "How do you torture someone who saved 847 lives?" demanded retired General Robert Hayes, speaking to a crowd of 10,000 protesters outside the prison. "This woman exemplifies everything great about American military service, and they tried to break her like a common criminal." Warden Patricia Voss became the public face of institutional cruelty. Her photo appeared on every major news outlet alongside footage of Alexandra's torture, creating an immediate association between her administrative decisions and systematic abuse. Death threats poured into Voss's office by the thousands. Protesters gathered outside her home, chanting demands for her prosecution. Her children were forced to transfer schools due to harassment from classmates whose parents were outraged by her actions. Patricia Voss authorized the torture of a Medal of Honor recipient, read a typical social media post. "She should be prosecuted for war crimes against American military personnel." Officer Bradley, whose direct participation in the torture was captured on video, became a symbol of corrupted law enforcement. His face appeared on wanted posters created by activist groups, and his personal information was leaked online, despite federal attempts to maintain security. This man took money to torture a woman who saved hundreds of lives. One viral post declared, "He's a traitor to everything law enforcement should represent." The corruption payments were released by federal investigators, showing exactly how much each conspirator had received. The amounts stunned the public. Bradley's $60,000 for implementing torture protocols, the judge's $200,000 for ensuring conviction, the prosecutors combined $300,000 for fabricating evidence. They sold out a war hero for less money than a luxury car costs, posted one outraged veteran. These people have no honor, no decency, no shame. International reaction was equally swift. Allied military forces who had served alongside Alexandra during joint operations issued statements condemning her treatment. Lieutenant Commander Kane saved the lives of British, Canadian, and Australian personnel during the Kabul evacuation, announced UK Defence Minister James Morrison. Her treatment by American civilian authorities is a disgrace that damages the reputation of military cooperation between our nations. The video of Alexandra's transformation during the chemical plant emergency became a powerful symbol of hidden heroism. Millions watched as she went from tortured prisoner to commanding medical professional, showcasing the extraordinary capabilities that had been systematically suppressed. "This is what they tried to destroy," became a rallying cry across social media, accompanied by footage of Alexandra directing the emergency medical response with calm expertise. Corporate America responded quickly to the public outrage. Major defense contractors announced suspensions of contracts with anyone involved in the conspiracy. Military support organizations launched fundraising campaigns for Alexandra's recovery and legal expenses. The Veterans Administration announced immediate policy changes to prevent similar cases of unidentified veterans being abused in civilian custody. "We are implementing new protocols to ensure that no military veteran can be subjected to systematic abuse without triggering federal intervention," announced VA Secretary Michael Chen. Hollywood celebrities began posting support messages, amplifying the story to even broader audiences. Entertainment industry figures who rarely commented on military issues spoke out forcefully about Alexandra's treatment. "This woman is a real-life superhero who saved hundreds of lives," posted actress Jennifer Lawrence. "The people who tortured her are the real criminals." The contrast between Alexandra's heroic service and her brutal treatment created a powerful narrative that transcended political divisions. Conservative and liberal commentators alike condemned the conspiracy, finding rare common ground in their outrage over her abuse. Legal experts began predicting massive civil rights lawsuits against everyone involved in Alexandra's torture. Estimates of potential damages ranged into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The violation of Lieutenant Commander Kane's constitutional rights under color of authority represents one of the most egregious civil rights cases in modern history, explained legal analyst Rebecca Torres on MSNBC. The financial liability alone could bankrupt the institutions involved. More importantly for public opinion, the story became a symbol of how institutions could fail individual heroes. Alexandra Kane represented everything Americans admired about military service, making her abuse feel like a personal betrayal to millions of citizens. "She saved lives for her country, and her country failed to protect her," summarized the editorial board of The Washington Post. "This case demands not just justice for Lieutenant Commander Kane, but fundamental reform of the systems that allowed such systematic abuse to occur." The viral vindication was complete. Within 48 hours, Alexandra Kane had transformed from unknown prisoner to national symbol of heroism betrayed, and justice delayed, but not denied. The next phase would determine whether public outrage could produce lasting change and meaningful accountability for everyone involved in her systematic torture. 6 months after her rescue from Thornfield Correctional, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Kane stood before a joint session of Congress, wearing her dress blues with every ribbon and medal she had earned through 8 years of extraordinary service. The packed chamber fell silent as she approached the podium, her presence commanding immediate respect from representatives and senators who had followed her story with growing admiration. "Thank you for allowing me to address this joint session," Alexandra began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had directed the chemical plant emergency and countless military operations. I stand before you, not just as a victim of systematic abuse, but as a representative of the thousands of veterans and active military personnel who serve with honor, while trusting that their government will protect them in return. The speech had been months in preparation, crafted not for revenge, but for meaningful reform. Alexandra had used her recovery time to study the institutional failures that had made her torture possible, developing comprehensive recommendations that would prevent similar cases. The conspiracy that targeted me succeeded because it exploited gaps between federal and state law enforcement systems, she continued. My experience was extreme, but the vulnerabilities it exposed affect every service member who might someday need witness protection or face false accusations. The Department of Justice had already implemented several changes based on Alexandra's recommendations. All military personnel in witness protection programs now had enhanced federal oversight, with mandatory Pentagon notification of any criminal charges or imprisonment. We have established the Military Personnel Protection Protocol, announced Attorney General Robert Chen during a press conference following Alexandra's congressional testimony. No veteran or active duty service member can be held in state custody without federal verification of charges and monitoring of treatment conditions. More significantly, Alexandra had used her platform to launch the Veterans Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting military personnel from institutional abuse and corruption. Too many veterans fall through cracks in our system, she explained to a gathering of military families at the foundation's first fundraising event. They serve with honor overseas, then face bureaucratic indifference or actual hostility when they return home. We're going to change that. The foundation's first major initiative was a legal defense fund for veterans facing questionable criminal charges. 3 cases had already been identified where former military personnel appeared to be victims of frame jobs similar to Alexandra's experience. We're not just helping individual cases, explained the Foundation's legal director, former JAG officer, Colonel Maria Santos. We're identifying patterns of corruption that target veterans and building the resources to fight back systematically. The prosecution of the conspiracy had yielded unprecedented results. 12 individuals received federal sentences ranging from 15 years to life in prison. The scope of justice satisfied public demands while sending a clear message about targeting American military personnel. Warden Patricia Voss received 25 years for conspiracy, torture, and violations of civil rights under color of authority. During her sentencing, she offered a tearful apology that Alexandra accepted with characteristic grace. I forgive Patricia Voss because holding on to anger would only damage my ability to serve others, Alexandra told reporters outside the courthouse. But forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. Her actions harmed not just me, but the integrity of our entire correctional system. Officer Bradley received life in prison without parole for his direct participation in torture, aggravated by his acceptance of bribes to abuse a military veteran. His sentencing drew protests from police organizations who insisted he didn't represent law enforcement values. The federal prosecutors and judge who had participated in fabricating Alexandra's case received sentences ranging from 30 years to life, with the judge's sentence enhanced due to his position of public trust. These sentences reflect the seriousness of corrupting our justice system to target American heroes, announced lead prosecutor Jennifer Torres. We will never tolerate the use of government power to abuse those who serve our country. But Alexandra's focus had moved beyond punishment toward prevention and positive change. She had returned to active duty with a new mission, training the next generation of special operations personnel while continuing her work exposing international arms dealing networks. My torture gave me unique insights into enemy tactics, she explained during a classified briefing to SEAL team commanders. They tried to break me using techniques they've refined on captured American personnel overseas. Understanding their methods makes our training more effective and our people more resistant to abuse. Her curriculum innovations at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center incorporated lessons learned from her torture experience, improving SEER training protocols and psychological resistance techniques. Lieutenant Commander Kane has revolutionized our understanding of torture resistance, reported Admiral Sarah Chen to the Chief of Naval Operations. Her direct experience combined with her analytical capabilities has produced training improvements that will benefit our personnel for decades. The personal integration had been more challenging but equally successful. Alexandra had embraced both aspects of her identity, the warrior who had saved hundreds of lives in combat, and the survivor who had endured systematic torture without breaking. "I'm not the same person who entered Thornfield," she reflected during an interview with Military Times. "The experience changed me, but not in the ways my torturers intended. I'm more determined to protect others, more committed to justice, and more aware of how precious our freedoms really are." Her relationship with Detective Frank Morrison, the man whose fabricated murder had been used to frame her, had evolved into an unlikely friendship built on their shared experience of being victims of the same conspiracy. "Alex saved my reputation just by surviving," Morrison explained during a joint interview. "Without her endurance and the federal investigation it triggered, I would have spent the rest of my career under suspicion for crimes that never happened." The two had collaborated on a book about their experience, with proceeds supporting both the Veterans Justice Foundation and organizations working to prevent false convictions. The international impact of Alexandra's case had also produced lasting changes. NATO allies had implemented new protocols for protecting military personnel from civilian legal systems, while arms-dealing networks had suffered significant disruption from renewed enforcement cooperation. The conspiracy that targeted Lieutenant Commander Kane ultimately strengthened international efforts against weapons trafficking, reported CIA Director Amanda Price to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Their attempt to eliminate our most effective operative backfired, drawing unprecedented resources and attention to their networks. Perhaps most importantly, Alexandra's story had changed how Americans viewed both military service and institutional accountability. Her case became a teaching moment in law schools, military academies, and police training programs about the importance of protecting those who serve. She represents the best of America: service, sacrifice, and resilience in the face of injustice, summarized President Sarah Williams during a White House ceremony honoring Alexandra's contributions. Her story reminds us that heroes aren't just people who perform extraordinary acts, but people who maintain their integrity and commitment to others even when facing the worst that humanity can inflict. Alexandra's final words to the Congressional Joint Session captured her transformation from victim to advocate. "I endured torture so that others might never have to. I survived betrayal to rebuild trust. I faced the worst of our system to help create the best version of what we can become." Standing at attention as Congress gave her a sustained ovation, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Kane embodied the promise that heroism, properly supported and protected, could indeed overcome any injustice and inspire lasting positive change. Her journey from ice water torture victim to congressional witness had become a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who serve, and a blueprint for ensuring that such service would never again be met with systematic betrayal and abuse. The hero who had saved 847 lives in Kabul had saved countless more through her courage in surviving torture and her dedication to preventing others from enduring similar ordeals. Her legacy would be measured not just in lives rescued from immediate danger, but in institutional reforms that would protect future generations of American heroes. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.